And let's begin by setting the stage. It is a bloody stage indeed. It is a stage that has seen the slaughter of 60 million human children since Roe v. Wade. 60 million. Why do some of us find this slaughter to be unthinkable and an injustice? Well, because every single one of those 60 million were innocent and defenseless human beings. And it is always wrong to directly and intentionally kill innocent and defenseless human beings. It's as simple as that. Our position is very straightforward. That's our whole position. I just summed it up. Are you killing an innocent and defenseless human being? Then it's wrong. That's it. The pro-abortion person here will respond with a few different moves. The first is to try to dehumanize the unborn, of course. He'll claim that the unborn child is not a human person and thus does not have the same moral standing and cannot make the same moral claims for itself that a, quote, real person can make. Now, the idea that an unborn child isn't human, which is something that you do hear from pro-aborts, even supposedly educated ones, is such a silly, absurd, anti-scientific notion that I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. It is simply a scientific fact that the being in the womb is indeed a being, a living being, and it is a member of the human species. Now, we know that because all living things have to be a member of some species or another. If an unborn child isn't human, then what species is it? Now, oftentimes what you'll hear is, oh, it's not a human, it's a fetus. Well, that's like saying it's not a human, it's a boomer, okay? This is which maybe kind of works sometimes, but this is a stage of human development. A stage of human development means that it is a human. And we know that it's of the human species because, well, it has human DNA and other human characteristics, but also it was conceived by two human beings, which is a pretty good giveaway there. Two human beings have never in history conceived anything other than another human. Now, as for living, is it living? Well, there are only three states of being that a physical entity can be. And I think this holds true for the most part, except maybe at the quantum level. That would be most things are either alive, dead, or inanimate. Now, is the unborn baby inanimate? No. Inanimate objects don't grow, they don't develop, they don't move on their own, they don't consume food. This podium right here is inanimate. It will never be anything other than this. It will decay and fall apart. You could cut it into pieces and build it into something else, but it's never on its own going to grow into something else because it's inanimate. Is the unborn child dead? Well, no, we know it's not dead because if it was dead, then we wouldn't need the abortion. So that leaves only living. Okay, so the baby is a living human. We've established that. We've settled that argument already. That's good. What about person, though? Well, this is a little bit more interesting because the pro-abortion individual, if he has any degree of sophistication, will probably concede that a, quote, fetus, or undocumented infant, as I like to call them, he'll concede that it's a living human, but he'll say, okay, fine, it's a living human, you're right about that, but it's not a person. And he'll say that it's not a person because it's still developing and it is entirely dependent on its mother for survival, and this, he will say, means that it lacks moral standing. But this view that personhood is acquired by degree and that it's forfeit if you are entirely dependent on someone else for survival clearly implicates more than just the unborn. It would seem that the sick, the infirm, the disabled, the elderly would all get caught up in this net. If we're not willing to do that, if we're not willing to look at an infant child at, let's say, 3 months out of the womb, or an elderly person in a nursing home, or a disabled person in a wheelchair, if we're not willing to look at them and say that, well, you're kind of not as much of a person as me, you're a little bit less people-y than me. If we're not willing to do that, if we're not willing to say that personhood is attained by degree contingent upon factors like self-sufficiency, then we are left with this idea that personhood is inherent, and all of its attending moral rights and dignities are inherent. Inherent means existing in something as a permanent, essential, and characteristic attribute of that thing. If something is inherent, that means that it belongs to the essential nature of that thing. The idea that our human dignity, our human rights are inherent, our personhood is inherent, this is an idea that lies very much at the foundation of our country. In fact, any notion of human rights depends on this idea. But, and this is just a logical conclusion, if an unborn baby does not have inherent value, then human value itself is not permanent or essential, and thus if an unborn baby does not have inherent value, then neither does anybody in this room. That's the thing about inherent value. You cannot gain it. That's why it's inherent. You either have it or you don't. It's a very simple formula. This is how I try to explain it to people who are confused. Take yourself in your current form. Now, think about yourself. Okay, right now you have inherent value, inherent worth. You're a person. Great. Now rewind back to yesterday. Were you a person back then? Did you have inherent value back then? Yes. Okay, now rewind back 10 years ago. Still a person, still have inherent value. Now go back to your first birthday. Were you a person back then? You had inherent value, you had human rights, all that good stuff. Now go back to the moment that you emerged from your mother's birth canal. Was that you? Did you have inherent value? Okay, now rewind the clock back just 10 more seconds. Just 10 more seconds. What happened in those 10 seconds? All that happened is you changed locations. That's it. It's still you. My point here is that there is an unbroken chain of you-ness connecting the you of right now to the you that came into being at the moment of conception. And so whatever I can say is inherent in you now, I must logically say was inherent in you then. That is why an unborn child is a human person, and that is why killing the human person who is innocent and defenseless is by definition murder. But really, the personhood argument for abortion is actually even worse than you think. It's so bad. The pro-abortion argument is so bad and indefensible and stupid that I could even grant you this point and you would still lose. Let me explain why. The pro-abortion person with this argument about personhood is really making two assertions, not one. What they're saying is, number one, an unborn baby is not a person, he is merely a potential person. Number two, therefore, we can kill it. Now, wait a second. Two does not flow logically from one. I'm not going to give you that. That's a whole other argument you need to make. You haven't made that argument. Even if I agreed with you, even if I said, okay, it's not a person, fine, it's just a potential person. Now you need to explain to me why that means it's okay to suck its brains out. Because I'm sure everyone in this room right now would agree that just because something isn't a person doesn't mean you can kill it. I mean, in this country, you can't even destroy endangered sea turtle eggs without going to, facing a fine or potentially jail time. So I don't see how you make that case. Because even if it is a potential person, why wouldn't you treat this potential person like it is the most valuable thing in the world? It's a potential person. How amazing is that?